Rob, one way to test if you're in a dream or not is by turning the lights on and off.
I already know for sure that I'm in a dream today.
Is that because your lava lamp won't turn off?
No, because customer number 247 finally paid off their late fees. No way that happens in reality.
Welcome to Rewind Video. I'm Bob.
I'm Rob.
And we love movies. Good ones, bad ones, old ones, new ones, big movies, small movies. Rob, I have a rule when it comes to dreams. If you want to tell me about your dream from last night, you've got to do it in one sentence.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Right? It needs to be something like, I worked in a salad dressing factory and had robot arms.
Yes. And if I have follow-up questions, then continue. But otherwise, no.
Right. Yeah. If what you want to do instead is tell me some long story full of nonsense.
Or interpret it for me.
Yeah,
no, thanks.
No, not interested. I suggest you find someone else to tell that story to.
Or a different video store.
Right. Yeah. Well, yes. Not that there is anything that can compare to Rewind Video, but
True.
Yeah, maybe there will be someone who will listen to your dream story. However, that doesn't mean I'm not interested in a movie about dreams. Because I get to see things, Rob. I get to see the weird shit your brain came up with in the middle of the night.
We all have dreams.
Yes, we do. And so for the next hour, we're going to talk about dreams, which is 59 minutes and 45 seconds longer than I usually want to spend talking about dreams. But I think it's going to work. You and I have the honorable task of keeping the staff recommendation shelf at the store stocked with movies that our customers ought to rent. And when we add new movies to the shelf, we adhere to a theme. This week's theme is dreams.
Somebody pinch me. I can't believe I'm hosting this wonderful podcast.
It's real. This is real.
This is really happening?
Yeah, this is really happening.
We'll see. I'm not convinced.
So I have a reputation for falling asleep during movies. So, yeah, sometimes I've got dreams on my mind regardless of what the movie is about.
Sometimes it's a defense mechanism.
Right. Yeah. Get me out of this. I don't want to continue watching. But I wanted this theme because dreams can often be handled poorly and they can also be cliche. But when they're not, I think it makes for a good film.
Yeah, they have to be handled carefully, though. They could go really bad, I think.
I totally agree.
And movies themselves are sort of dreams too, right?
I think that's a great case to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good take. While there are movies that give us all sorts of dreams, the two types of dreams that seem to come up most often are scary dreams and sexy dreams.
Yeah.
Right? You know?
Well, yeah. I mean, those two types of dreams fit snugly into genres that do well already, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I think tonight we've got both categories covered as well as quite a few others.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of dreams that would fit nicely into a David Lynch movie or something, too.
For sure.
But, you know, not everybody can throw those in a movie and have it make sense. I don't know that
Not
David,
that he does.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know that he can either, but that's for a different podcast.
Yes. Well, we've got some fun picks tonight, and I was surprised when coming up for movies that fit this theme, how many I wanted to choose from. And, you know, after taking some notes and looking back on my movies, there's some weird parallels between them, but yeah, this is a theme that I think we could easily return to, but I'm happy where we started.
Started in a great place. In a dream.
In a dream.
This has been a dream.
And speaking of starting, I think you should kick us off with your first choice.
Okay, I'm going to start in the year of 2001. The movie is Waking Life. The opposite of a dream.
Right.
This is filed under, Is This Real Life? Here's the back of the box. Waking Life is about a young man in a persistent, lucid, dreamlike state. The film follows its protagonist as he initially observes and later participates in philosophical discussions that weave together issues like reality, free will, our relationships with others, and the meaning of life.
Big, bold.
Yeah, it's very ambitious.
It is.
Tagline, dreams. What are they? An escape from reality or reality itself?
Cool.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's more of a statement about dreams. It's
Sure.
that's what but it's not really a tagline.
Yeah, it's more of a thesis.
Yeah, I have some bad taglines tonight, but
Likewise.
this is Richard Linklater's animated journey through the dream world.
Yes, and animated was the right way to do this.
Yeah, I think that was what he said. He said like he had this idea for a long time, and he said there was just really no way to film this in real life and make it look not stupid. He was like it just wouldn't make any sense.
Yes.
The animation style here is really cool. It's called rotoscoping,
Right.
And they shoot the live action and then they animate on top of it, but individual artists work on different scenes, and so they all look a little bit differently. It's not just, one style. It did remind me a little bit of Squiggle Vision. That was what Dr. Katz was animated with.
Oh,
if you remember that.
Yeah.
And that wasn't quite the same thing, but it was just kind of like the way the movement happened to the characters reminded me a lot of that.
Yes.
In this movie, there's really not much, or there's no plot. There's no plot whatsoever. There's not much of a story. Only a few characters are in more than one scene.
Right.
We follow Wiley Wiggins of Dazed and Confused fame.
Yes.
He literally just drifts from one conversation to the next,
Yes.
just randomly.
Yes.
And it's just sort of a movie that's crafted completely out of ideas. And Linklater is somebody that has a lot of ideas.
He is. Yes.
This really comes across to me as more of like an experimental film than a narrative film.
100%. And, I remember when I first saw this, it was after I had seen Dazed and Confused, and I was worried that Wiley Wiggins was going to become Linklater's muse in a way that Johnny Depp and, Burton worked together. And I was like, oh, he was good in Dazed and Confused. I didn't care for him much here, even though I love this movie.
That's interesting because it's like I don't think his performance really I think his performance is covered up by the animation for one thing.
For sure. Yeah, he has. Well, it would seem like he'd be a great fit for this because he kind of has like Dazed and Confused.
He blends into the background.
Yeah, he does, and he has this airiness and kind of philosophical quality to him that you would think works well. And who knows? For a lot of people, he might be the exact right guy, but. I don't know. It distracted me a little bit.
I can see
but
that.
again, I
his character's
still
also
loved.
kind of weird because he has to be the person that comes in and goes like, "Well, I don't know," because otherwise he serves no purpose in the movie.
Yes.
He can't really have like, I don't know. He can't. He has to just kind of just be the sounding board and go like, well, maybe that's true, and
He's
I don't
the
know.
catalyst
And
for a lot of
so
these
it's a character. He's kind of a sieve,
Yeah.
But nobody does a people talking movie like Richard Linklater.
Nobody.
I mean, this is this is a lot of different people talking about a lot of different things, and structurally, it's a lot like it's more similar to like Slacker than it is to, before Midnight or something.
That's a great comparison. Yeah.
Some of the speakers are actual philosophers. Some of them are like literally in the middle of teaching a class.
Yes.
And others are just like regular ass people who have their own thoughts about, what life is and how to perceive reality. And we just kind of float around and experience these ideas along with Wiley Wiggins. And I think that's something that Linklater is like really suited to is just kind of, I've said this before, he just kind of lingers in places.
Right.
And lets you experience things. You wait for a moment to happen and it does. Some of these scenes are just minutes long of a person talking.
Right. And when you think about the various Linklater films that we've brought to the shelf in the past, that's kind of true of all of them, in spite of the fact that others have had more of a coherent narrative than this does.
Yeah.
But like you're still just there as like a fly on the wall watching a conversation happen, and he just finds a way to make them compelling.
Absolutely. And he finds the right people to play these parts, and
Yes.
he just lets reality happen.
I think that if there was ever a theme that we've tackled that this would also fit into, it's probably the getting high theme. Because I think this is a great movie to like smoke some weed to and just absorb, but it gets your mind going.
I don't know that anybody gets high in the movie, but
No.
clearly some of these characters are getting high off screen. or at least in parts of their lives.
100%. 100%.
But I think as a society and as a culture, we should interact more with these kinds of ideas, especially in pop culture. These are themes that Linklater tackles in a lot of his other movies, like time and reality and perception. But here it's like kind of made literal. You have characters just sitting around and talking about what does it mean to be alive, and
Right.
what does it mean when time slips away, and what is death?
Yes.
One of the critiques of this movie, especially when it came out, was like, oh, it's kind of like a philosophy 101 class. It's just like all these like surface level ideas, but none of them are really like explored much further. But it's also like, what are you supposed to do in a movie?
Right.
Are you supposed to actually teach a class? Or Linklater, I think he said at one point that this was his way to like empty out his notebook.
Which I can understand that. Yeah.
Sounds kind of sloppy. You're like, oh yeah, I could just have these things, and it's like literally he couldn't fit this into another movie, and he wanted this line, and which sounds like it wouldn't work, but I think for any director, I think Linklater's the guy that would make it work.
It's funny that he describes it that way, because the way I understand it, the movie Love Actually is exactly that. It's just the screenwriter had a bunch of ideas, none of them were fully developed, and he just decided to mash them all together and put them in a movie.
I've never seen that. Is that a vignette movie? Is that like
yes, pretty much? Yeah.
Okay.
And it does. I hate that movie, but here it really works, and you get a lot of just small doses of very profound ideas. And I was introduced to this shortly after it came out when I was still in college, and I watched it on repeat countless times. It made me think, wow, I should be having more profound conversations with my friends than I normally do. But that was at a time too when I was still young and seeking this out. But even today, it's a worthy watch and a lot of fun to revisit.
Of all the movies we're covering tonight, I'm looking at your list and mine. I think this is kind of the only one that has a thesis statement on what dreams actually are.
I think I agree. Yeah, I do.
This movie is about dreams. It's about what is dreaming, what is reality, what is the connection between the two.
Yes.
So this entire movie is a dream.
I don't remember a movie that leaned into the rotoscope animation style before this, and I know that even Linklater revisited afterward, and there have been other movies since. But I agree, it's a beautiful movie, not in just how it looks, but what it's trying to say.
Absolutely.
And so,
it's a thinker. It causes your mind to wander, like a lot of people talking movies will. It has a lot to say about a lot of things, and I think it's top tier Linklater, which is at a crowded tier.
Yes, it is.
But I honestly can't imagine a staff recommendation shelf about dreams that didn't include this movie. So I'm putting it on the shelf this week.
Couldn't agree more. And for anyone who hasn't seen this, I know that it probably sounds heavy, but I think one thing that's nice about these short vignettes where we're entering in and out of these conversations is that you're never in one for too long, and it's just enough to get your gears turning. Mm-hmm. And that's great. That's exactly how it should be.
And it's not a debate. It's just like people having thoughts, and some of them are interesting, some of them aren't, and some of them are fleeting, some of them really get you thinking.
Well, fine choice. I was thrilled to go back to this. It had been probably 10 years since I'd seen it, but yeah, can't wait. Can't wait for the next rewatch, and I hope that our customers give it a shot. Well, fine pick. I'm going to start off my selection of dream films with Wes Craven's New Nightmare from 1994. Ooh. This is plucked from the Call is Coming from Inside the Movie section of the store. Here's the back of the box synopsis. In this meta horror film, a demonic entity uses the fictional character of Freddy Krueger to enter the real world and torment Elm Street heroine Heather Langenkamp and her family. Tagline, this time, the terror doesn't stop at the screen. Yeah, okay. I don't know. How could we talk about dreams without a Nightmare on Elm Street movie appearing on the shelf?
Are you a big Nightmare on Elm Street fan?
Well, I would say yes. I love those big franchise horror films from the late 80s into the 90s and the 2000s. You know, you've got your Halloweens, your Nightmare on Elm Streets, Friday the 13th, and
You're a big Jason Goes to Manhattan fan.
is there even another Jason film to watch? I've probably spent more time with the Nightmare on Elm Street series growing up than the other two, even though I've come to love the Halloween franchise probably the most of the bunch.
Interesting. I definitely love the Halloween franchise the most of all those. I didn't have a huge connection to this franchise. I've seen the first one and this one. I have seen this one most of all, though. I'm most familiar with this.
Interesting.
I don't think I've seen any other besides those two, though.
Well, that's not a bad way to go. You know, the middle films get pretty wacky. And Wes Craven didn't have much to do with those other than, you know, creating this world. But he directed the first one. He directed this one. He wrote and directed this one. And this might be my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And I know that's probably blasphemous to anyone who's a fan of this franchise, but most of this movie is just really smart. It's also a great love letter to the Nightmare series as a whole, especially the first film, which Wes Craven obviously has a lot of attachment to. The gist of this film sees many of the stars of the series playing themselves. So Heather Langenkamp, who played Nancy, is the woman who starred in these films. Robert Englund plays himself as the guy who portrayed Freddy. Even Wes Craven is here as the writer and director behind the Nightmare movies, and he's writing a new movie, which is the movie we're watching, as the film unfolds. So this is set in a world where the Nightmare on Elm Street movies are just that, a series of films that these people have starred in.
I also love that they really inflate how huge the Nightmare on Elm Street series is.
Yes.
As in, people would just show up to a random talk show in costumes and stuff.
Right. And you know, I wish I was older and more tapped into culture when these films were as big as they were, because there's a point in the movie where Heather Langenkamp's character compares Freddy Krueger to Santa Claus and King Kong. Like, everybody knows who Freddy Krueger is. And it definitely made me wonder, well, how big and significant was he when all of these were as big as they were?
Well, I'll say this. Like I said, I had not seen these movies growing up, but I definitely knew who Freddy Krueger was.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. I don't know that we have many franchise film villains, maybe apart from, you know, the character from Scream or maybe the Saw character, that has a presence as, you know, just big as Freddy Krueger or Jason or
I bet you
Michael
kids
Myers.
know Freddy Krueger still today. There hasn't been a Freddy Krueger movie in how long?
Since 2010.
Yeah.
So, while I usually hate the word meta, this film is very meta. And given where the franchise had gone, largely kind of steering itself toward schlocky sequels, this was a pretty needed pivot. This film understands that the Nightmare movies needed a reboot back to something that was more traditionally scary. And
this was what year was this?
This was 94.
So he was steering towards Scream at this point.
He was 2 years away from it. He's cracking his knuckles in order to bring the Scream franchise to the world. And yeah, you know, I think that while comedy has always been an element of these movies, and it's here too, New Nightmare is definitely trying to reground the series in horror. So Wes Craven is back in charge, having not written or directed a Nightmare movie since the first one. And as I mentioned here, he plays himself. There's callbacks to the franchise as a whole, but a lot more references to that first movie. I'd say there's even an acknowledgement that the franchise took on its own identity after it left Craven's hands. Why did I choose this? It's a big swing, especially for 1994, you know? And as we just talked about, it almost feels like Wes Craven is auditioning for what he ends up doing in Scream.
Well, I'm thinking at this point, he had to have been thinking that horror needed a kick in the ass, basically. Mm-hmm. Maybe this wasn't it, but he was getting close.
Yes, totally agree. And I'm glad that he tried it with this, because it felt like a fitting conclusion to the Nightmare series. Dreams are fundamental to how the character of Freddy kills his victims. When they fall asleep, he comes to life, gains his power. Dreaming provides kind of a gateway into the real world where he's able to kill. Except in New Nightmare, the killing is not quite as silly as it was in previous entries. And in this film, much like the original, you're actually afraid for the characters who let themselves fall asleep. I think the writing here is surprisingly good for about 3/4 of this movie. It takes itself seriously, but not too seriously, and it understands how to strike the right balance between horror and comedy. Why didn't I choose this movie? I would say that the makeup for Freddy is not a highlight, nor is the nightmare realm that we enter into during the last 25 minutes.
You're trying to give him a new look.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I guess there's a 90s aspect to it that doesn't work anymore. It just looks weird.
It does.
Because like in the 90s, that was like the goth thing. And not that it was a goth character, but they were just kind of like giving him a little bit too much of that shading.
Yeah. It's a little bit... Yeah, it doesn't work as well as it should.
It looks like Freddy wearing makeup.
Right. Yeah.
Basically.
In the end of the film where very often in these movies, we end up in the world that Freddy inhabits, and it's usually a little bit outlandish and ridiculous. It is very much that here. But that kind of thing is also what the series is known for, and I think it only feels out of place here because the rest of the film is a lot more frightening and serious than what we're used to from the Nightmare series. So... as I said, this is the true end to the franchise. There was a crossover follow-up with Freddy vs. Jason and then a 2010 reboot with Jackie Earle Haley and Rooney Mara. But yeah, this is the right place to stop, I would say.
Yeah.
And I don't even think that you need... if you're a fan of the franchise, yes, watch them all. But,
how many sequels are there between the first one and this one?
4.
Okay.
Yeah. 4 sequels.
Probably too many. I really liked Robert Englund as himself in this.
Oh yeah,
it was cool to see that.
Yeah, the guy that plays Nancy's and Heather Langenkamp's dad in the original movies is also good. But yeah Robert Englund is awesome. He's like gentle and artistic and kind.
He's like, there's this monster that I have to draw pictures of.
Right, yes. This notches a 3.3 on Letterboxd. Not unfair. One review that I enjoyed came from the user PD187 on Letterboxd, who said, "This is the scariest one, even though Freddy looks like a Dick Tracy villain."
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It is.
That's what it is. And Dick Tracy, same thing. It's just
yeah,
looks like comic book characters wearing makeup.
I agree. Well, I'm throwing it on the shelf. I would say give it a shot.
Great addition.
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna keep us in the 90s for a moment.
I like it.
I'm choosing The Big Lebowski. You can find this in the sports section of the store. Back of the box. Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski, a Los Angeles slacker who only wants to bowl and drink White Russians, is mistaken for another Jeffrey Lebowski, a wheelchair-bound millionaire, and finds himself dragged into a strange series of events involving nihilists, adult film producers, ferrets, errant toes, and large sums of money.
Well, if I hadn't seen this, my curiosity would be piqued.
Yeah. Tagline is just a line from the movie, unfortunately. It's good knowing he's out there, the dude, taking her easy for the rest of us sinners. Or for all of us sinners.
They should have just ended at, it's good knowing he's out there.
It's good knowing he's out there, yeah.
Yeah, that's all you need.
Yeah, okay. I'm not going to hold it against it. The Big Lebowski is Joel and Ethan Coen's 1998 cult classic absurdist noir comedy. Is that a fair description?
I would say yes. Yes.
The Coens are, I would say, idiosyncratic filmmakers. But to me, this is kind of the pinnacle of that style.
Yeah.
All of their quirks kind of work in perfect harmony here.
Totally agree. I am not generally a fan of the Coen brothers.
Yeah, you said that.
They've made some great films, and I'm not going to criticize those movies. It just didn't hit for me. Not all of them, but this one is great.
This one works.
This one is great.
I think this. I think this probably is no longer a cult classic.
No,
I mean it's on cable. I think at this point.
Yeah.
I mean it's hard to find people that are into movies that haven't seen this.
Right. And I will admit, I watched this shortly after it came out, and I must not have been in the right frame of mind, and I hadn't revisited it until we rewatched it together for this theme. And boy, have I missed out on some joy since this was released.
Yeah, I was kind of in the same boat as you. I saw it when shortly after it came out in the late 90s, and I don't know if I was quite ready to accept it fully, and I didn't dislike it.
No.
But I think the difference is I came back to it much sooner than you did. I came back to it a few years later.
Right.
And I was, thinking like, how come all my friends are saying lines from this movie? Maybe I should give it a rewatch.
Yeah, I think I would have done the same if not for the fact that I continued to watch Coen Brothers movies and felt like, well, I'm just not loving these guys. So why would I go back to The Big Lebowski? And I was wrong.
Yeah, you were wrong. So the plot, it involves mistaken identity, a supposed kidnapping, a bowling tournament, the pursuit of a stolen rug. Yes. You mix it all out. You get a plot with a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous. But it ultimately, it ends up where it started, basically.
Yeah.
Joel Coen said to IndieWire in kind of a famous quote about how like they wanted to do a Raymond Chandler type of story that was like
interesting, kind
of involved characters trying to solve a mystery, but like was needlessly complicated and just like went nowhere. So like it's not about the plot. It's Lebowski is a vibe. It's a state of mind. The plot is not important here. I mean, it is, but it's not. But it's like every other aspect to the movie. It's just kind of like it just enhances the richness of this world.
Yes, and boy, the characters make that world a wonderful place to occupy.
Absolutely.
We joked about this when we planned to rewatch it, but you almost want to go back and watch it again right when it ends because you're like, wow, I'd love to see kind of how these pieces came together. Now that I know how it concluded.
Like, wait a second. I have seen this movie dozens of times, and I still get that feeling. Like, I could watch this right now. I could watch it right over again.
Yes.
It's one of the reasons it's so rewarding on rewatch is because it's just so dense. There's so many things happening. Like, lines of dialogue or, like, a turn of phrase that you hear in one part of the movie, it'll pop up later, and it'll come out of a different character's mouth, and you can, like, do the calculation. You're like, oh, I see how he internalized that, and then interpreted it wrong, and then like fit it into their own point of view and just spit it out in a different situation in a different context. But like somehow the way that interpretation happened makes something else make sense later on. Mm-hmm. Even a minor character like Jesus, who has like no connection to the plot whatsoever, he's a giant figure in these guys' lives, and he just like adds to the world.
Yes.
Yes.
It leaves you with this feeling like, I want to go back and just live in this section of the city that these guys are part of and get another week in their lives because, like it's...
Well, I mean, even characters like the nihilists, like they could have been faceless thugs, There's these guys who are, they're muscle, But... I would watch a 10-episode Netflix series about them.
100%.
You know what I mean? The way they were portrayed in this movie, I'm like, yeah, I would watch a whole series about like what the fuck is up with these guys.
Yeah.
Every part of it has this greater meaning in the context of this movie that has no meaning overall. You know?
Right. I didn't know what I was missing out on when I watched this for the first time and didn't go back to it. But
that sounds high and mighty too, but it's not like that. It's more just like it's just fun.
Well, yeah. That is one of the things that I have disliked about the Coen brothers since this movie came out is when they try and dabble in humor, it doesn't always work. It very often doesn't work for me. But this movie is funny as hell, and I laughed a lot during its runtime.
Absolutely. And you know what? I've actually thought, I wonder how many of their movies maybe didn't get the chance to become this because it didn't catch fire for whatever reason. Maybe but I don't know. Like I haven't necessarily rewatched all their movies 15 times. Maybe some things do start to pop out.
Maybe.
But this is the one that really brings it all together. The dream sequences here, like everything else, they don't really serve much of a plot or much of a purpose for the plot. But they just provide more texture. they're not really the result of sleep, which is a weird thing for a dream sequence.
Right.
Most of our dream sequences happen because the character has fallen asleep. Here, he's been, knocked out with a punch the first time, and the second time he gets a drug cocktail that
Right.
puts him to sleep. And so the dream sequences, because of that and because it's in a weird movie, so they're just very surreal and weird, but they're kind of like traditionally symbolic.
Yes.
You know, and they're just like, okay, he's feeling anxiety about his situation, or he has this desire to get back to bowling, and
Right.
you know, they don't have a lot to say necessarily.
The role of bowling in these characters' lives, I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It's great.
This was sort of around the same time that Farrelly Brothers movie came out.
Kingpin?
Kingpin, yeah.
Yeah.
90s, that was, then it was like,
Right.
For a while, this was kind of like the other bowling movie, I think.
Right.
And people just thought it was a bowling movie.
Yeah. I think it had that reputation for a bit.
Yeah.
And maybe because the character of Jesus is so significant. I mean, significant and also not significant in this,
Right,
but
yeah.
he just has such a presence.
I mean, he's such a presence. I
Yeah,
mean, it's so
yeah,
great. It's so
yeah.
great.
You kind of said it at the top of this segment that no part of this movie is dispensable. And
Yeah.
these dream sequences, even though they are somewhat traditional in the way they play out, feel integral to the character of Lebowski and just give a little bit more color into who he is and what he's going through. So
Absolutely.
you can't have this movie without them.
I've been meaning to add this to a staff recommendation shelf for a long time, and I wanted to give you a chance to revisit it in the proper setting before I did that, and so I'm putting it up there for Dreams this week.
I'm glad you did. You could have chosen this for hair do's and don'ts because there is some great hair in this movie.
really is.
From Walter Sobchak to Lebowski to the dude, and Julianne Moore's haircut in this is pretty remarkable. But it's a great addition. I'm glad I got a chance to revisit it, and I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. It's like every single time I watch it, I notice something new or a different nuance to something that I noticed before but didn't quite understand how it, So if you haven't seen it before, definitely watch it. If you saw it yesterday, watch it again.
There you go. Well said. And well chosen. With that, I'm going to take us to my second pick, which is 1997's Open Your Eyes. We keep a copy of this in every section of the store, which will make sense when I get into why I chose this.
That ties into something I had to say about it.
Right, yeah. Back of the box synopsis: a very handsome man finds the love of his life, but he suffers an accident and needs to have his face rebuilt by surgery after it is severely disfigured. That is a small synopsis of this of what is a pretty big film.
In fairness, there's no way you could describe this movie on the back of the box.
No. It does not have a tagline, but I will give you the tagline for Vanilla Sky, which is the English language remake of this movie. Forget everything you know and open your eyes. Obviously a nod intentionally to the movie which Vanilla Sky
I like
was
that
based on.
tagline.
Yeah, I like that tagline too.
I mean, again, you can't sum it up on the back of the box, but a tagline nails it.
Tagline does nail it, yeah. So, as I said, this is the movie that Cameron Crowe's Vanilla Sky was based on. And it's hard to talk about this without also talking about Vanilla Sky. So I'm going to dabble in discussing both, even though my pick for tonight is Open Your Eyes. So, as we said, back of the box barely scratches the surface. At its core, this is about a man who wants to fix his face after he becomes disfigured. But there's a lot more to it than that. It's a drama, it's a love story, it's science fiction, it's a mystery, it's a thriller. This movie leaps from genre to genre in much the same way that dreams do.
Yes. Yes. So I will say I watched Vanilla Sky.
Yes.
I'm familiar with Vanilla Sky. I'm not familiar with Open Your Eyes, but I understand they're very close.
You are familiar with Open Your Eyes. Because Vanilla Sky is practically a shot-for-shot remake. There is so much.
That's what I thought.
Yes, that is identical. From the opening scene of, the character running through an empty city. there is so much that is nearly identical. It feels like more of a ripoff than a remake.
So my take on Vanilla Sky was that it's 10 or 12 movies all smushed up together, and then for some reason Tom Cruise is wearing a rubber mask in 3 of those movies.
3 of those scenes. 3 of those movies. 3 of those movies. Yeah. Yes. So let's get into that a little bit. I'm going to spoil a little bit of the plot in order to explain why this movie goes from genre to genre and why it's a lot bigger than the back of the box suggests. There's a subplot to this that sees our main character explore cryogenics when he reaches a dead end after trying to repair his face. And the gist of this cryogenic promise is that while you're asleep, you're living in a dream. And so that promise plays pretty prominently into the plot. Now, of course, the rubber mask comes into play because that's the only thing that the doctors are willing to give this guy after they can't repair his face. And incidentally, he's accused of murder.
Yeah.
Which, just begins to explain that, this movie's trying to do a whole bunch of things. Or is he? Yeah. This was directed by a guy named Alejandro Amenabar. He's helmed 13 movies, but the one that most people probably know him for is The Others with Nicole Kidman, which is a great film.
It is really good.
The cast is primarily Spanish actors here, but the one that most people will recognize is Penelope Cruz, who plays the woman our main character falls in love with. Penelope Cruz is excellent in this film. And she's one of the reasons that I prefer – she's one of the – facets of this movie that I prefer over Vanilla Sky, in spite of the fact that she is in Vanilla Sky playing the same character.
You prefer Penelope Cruz over Penelope Cruz.
Right. Penelope Cruz A over Penelope Cruz B.
Gotcha.
Part of the reason for that is that she's speaking her native language here, and it's just better. The performance is subtle, but she's... you're supposed to fall in love with this character in the same way that our main character does. And I think in both movies you do. I mean, she's strikingly beautiful, but also just this incredibly innocent and pure, wonderful, eccentric character. But it really comes through in the original movie. Vanilla Sky came out 4 years later. And it's, like I said, not your average remake. A lot of Vanilla Sky is shot for shot the same. And I've always been somebody who was an apologist for Vanilla Sky. It's wacky, it's flawed, but it's also better than the original in some selective ways. I think the perfect version of this story is one that pulls a little bit from each of these movies. I think that... the original is more subtle with a decidedly zealous plot. The acting is often better, notably Penelope Cruz when she's speaking Spanish. Mm-hmm. The whole film is a lot less of a horse pill to swallow. But Cameron Crowe's remake, I think, does some really interesting things with our lead character's lifestyle, and the music is better. The music is phenomenal.
It's a great soundtrack.
It's so good. The love triangle at the middle of that story feels a little bit more believable, and I also love Jason Lee in Vanilla Sky. He's phenomenal.
Yeah, he kind of has disappeared.
He has.
I miss his face.
Yeah, he was. He went from this into My Name Is Earl, and then poof.
Yeah,
gone.
I mean, he made that network TV money. He retired in New Jersey or something,
living off that. Yeah. This is another ambitious story that isn't afraid to try some things that seem a little outlandish on paper. And as batshit as the actual outline of the plot seems, it somehow works and makes for a pretty compelling watch. I think it works better in Open Your Eyes than it does in Vanilla Sky. Vanilla Sky isn't afraid to go to 11, whereas Open Your Eyes, I think, keeps us at 8,
Maybe that might be the Tom Cruise factor.
Yeah, Tom Cruise is always at 11, and here he is maybe closer to 13.
This was an interesting era of Tom Cruise. The Vanilla Sky era was. It was weird. He wasn't quite the crazy Tom Cruise that he is today, like the robot Tom Cruise. He was kind of human back then.
He was.
But in a weird way.
And it was
uncomfortably human.
I agree. And it was before we got to the point where it was weird to see Tom Cruise have a love interest on screen. He was very close to that stage in his career. But yeah, his chemistry with Penelope Cruz is pretty great, even though it's brief.
Yeah, it's surprisingly not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Which is normally his MO.
So Cameron Diaz's character in Open Your Eyes is a little less believable. You know, I think one thing that I love about Vanilla Sky is that she plays this obsessed woman who she won't let go of the idea that maybe this is a fleeting romance.
Right.
And I think you just buy what she is going through a little bit more in Cameron Crowe's version than the original.
Although I will say they kind of undercut it with the way they make you question what's happening.
That's true. That's true.
It makes everybody a less believable character.
You get more time to get to know Diaz's character in Vanilla Sky than you do the original, which I think helps with what ultimately happens with that character. But yeah, I think that every genre that this dabbles in is handled fairly effectively. None of them wear out their welcome. You know, like I said, this is science fiction. It's thriller. It's love story, and you get just enough. But I wouldn't blame anyone for saying, well, I would have loved more of one of these and less of another.
That's definitely my critique of Vanilla Sky.
Yeah.
That is just like, oh, we're doing this now? Okay, it's this kind of movie. It's like he's clicking his heels walking out of a girl's apartment. It's like, okay, cool. And then next scene he's driving off a cliff. It's like, okay.
Yes.
Make a decision here.
That I think that is among quite a few of the reasons that I ultimately prefer the original. The original, I think, is a better movie because it tried all of this first. And while it's hard to watch Open Your Eyes without thinking about Vanilla Sky, if you've seen the remake, when you pull the movies apart, the original deserves credit for being wholly original. But all of those segues between genres are a little more natural and less kind of jarring than they are in Vanilla Sky.
Interesting.
And yes, while I haven't talked much about the dream component, it's a big part of this story.
It's the whole thing.
It's massive. Yeah, we see dreams treated as something that our main character control and also something that's completely out of his hands. But dreams are also an alluring alternative to a miserable life. They're essentially a selling point to this cryogenic.
It's a consumer product.
It's a product, yes. If you can't live the life that you want anymore, you can at least dream about the life you wish you had. And
yeah, I mean in Vanilla Sky, they basically say the theme in the last like couple minutes of the movie where they're like, what is it, like dreams or death as a entertainment.
Yes. Death. Yeah.
That's kind of what it is. It's like, we've turned your death into something you can enjoy.
Yes, and it's interesting to think about. You know, if that were a product for sale, would it be something I'd want to buy? And I don't know. I think that this movie is seeming to say that dreams might seem alluring and attractive, but shit can go wrong, and you know, our relationship with dreams proves that they change pretty often and sometimes not for the best.
Don't privatize your dreams.
Don't privatize your dreams. So this gets a deserving 3.8 average on Letterboxd. It's, as we've discussed, a pretty divisive film. Some critics loved it, some didn't. Your mileage will vary depending on how willing you are to accept how eager this movie is with jumping from genre to genre. I think it's a worthwhile trip, and for that reason, I'm putting it on the shelf as my second pick for Dreams.
So, okay. I'm going to bring us up to the year of 2022. My final pick tonight is Smile.
I'm so glad you picked this movie.
I'm glad you got a chance to see it.
Yes.
This is written and directed by Parker Finn. This is his first feature. This is filed under good but unwanted advice. Back of the box. After witnessing a bizarre, traumatic incident involving a patient, Dr. Rose Cotter starts experiencing frightening occurrences that she can't explain. As an overwhelming terror begins taking over her life, Rose must confront her troubling past in order to survive and escape her horrifying new reality. Tagline, this is a good one. Once you see it, it's too late.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think horror movies are better at the taglines than a lot of these others.
Yeah.
This is a psychological horror movie about how overworked our healthcare professionals are.
Yes.
That's how I read it anyway.
I can't disagree with you.
Our main character, Rose, she's at, it's like sort of the end of the line of the string of bizarre suicides, all of which have happened in front of the person who is the next person in the line to commit suicide. And obviously the most recent one has happened in front of her.
Yes.
When this happens, the supernatural being or creature or monster, smile monster,
Yeah.
it attaches itself to the person that witnesses this. And it's sort of like a psychological parasite is how I interpreted it. It's like it drives you crazy. It takes your sanity. It eats your sanity and makes you crazy. And it just feeds on you until it's done with you. And then it jumps to somebody else when it can.
I think that's an accurate synopsis.
Now, supposedly the only way to pass it on before it kills you is to like kill somebody in front of somebody else. And then you pass on this trauma to some. I mean, it's a very small sample size to prove this. There's no real evidence of it.
Right.
And I'll admit, I don't totally understand how it works. I don't think the movie does either.
No, it felt a little bit. That's the only part of this movie that I wasn't really thrilled by.
Right.
But fine, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, you have to explain it, so sure they explained it.
Yeah.
I like a horror movie that gives our characters a mystery to solve.
Oh, me too.
And then they get to like be detectives and find out how to defeat the monster or whatever it is.
There's a lot about this movie that reminded me of The Ring, the Naomi Watts remake, and I loved that movie the first time I saw it. And she's trying to solve a mystery in the same way. And in fact, some of the deaths in this movie are strangely reminiscent of what we see in The Ring too, with like broken jaws and.
I'm sure the director had seen The Ring before.
100%. 100%.
Some things,
yes.
but. You know, it does a good job of allowing us to follow along with the characters. Like we're not ahead of it, we're not behind it. You know, we figure it out along with them as they do. I like the visual style of this movie.
Oh, me too.
It's got like a little bit of a retro like VHS 80s feel to it.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good looking movie, and it's got some good jump scares.
Some great jump scares, and I'm not usually a fan of jump scares, but when they're done well and done right, they're great.
Good creature design, gory violence that I appreciate. It's a good Friday night horror movie, is how I describe it.
I agree. And, you know, to go back briefly to this notion of, you know, dispelling this creature is maybe the only way to do it is to kill somebody else in front of somebody else. I feel like you need to give our main character a potential way out to make it feel like...
That's also horrifying.
Right, yeah. But, you know, of all the things that you mentioned that you loved about this, and I agree with all of them, my favorite thing was the acting in this movie. There was something about the way these characters interact with each other, and it was informed by the writing. The writing is great, but the way they're directed was phenomenal. There were so many scenes where I was like, I love how these characters interact. It feels real. It doesn't feel like I'm watching one character wait for another one to finish talking so that they can say their line. It was so fucking organic. I
love the therapist.
Yes.
I appreciate that this is the first horror movie of this generation that is kind of like, yeah, it's about trauma, but also like there's a lot of there's other stuff happening here.
Yes.
Because like every horror movie is about trauma, and it always has been. Like it's a horror movie. Like,
yes.
You know, it's like Halloween. Yes, Halloween's about trauma, and like, but the subtext is also like it's guilt. You know, because. Yes. You know, the main character, she's experiencing the effects of this traumatic incident, but what's haunting her is the guilt around the fact that like she might be responsible for this traumatic incident, you know?
Right.
She's at least partially to blame. And so like she's being haunted by guilt. She's been told her whole life, like, don't blame yourself, don't blame yourself. And she's never told anybody before, like, actually, I might be responsible.
Someone might be on me.
Yeah. And so like she's been haunted by this since before the smile monster's even been around. Mm-hmm. You know, and so like she has this compromised psychological immune system, and I think the smile monster is able to find those victims. You know, it's not just about like you pick somebody and you do something horrible in front of them. I think the monster is able to find its victim that way.
Yes.
It finds somebody who's susceptible.
Yep.
But as far as the dreams go, we get some fairly traditional Hollywood style dreams. It's like she has recurring nightmares about her mother, and we get the classic startle, wake from a dream, and sit up real quick.
Oh, sure. Yes.
Which I think might be the only one we get in our movies tonight, or just
so.
about.
Yeah.
Which is, a great trope, which I don't think ever happens in real life.
No.
It's never happened to me.
I've never sat up from a nightmare, but I have just shaken myself awake, but never sat up.
People in movies always sit straight up,
right
out of bed, and I've never witnessed that or done it myself. I could be wrong. Maybe it happens.
Yeah.
So like she's having these nightmares way before the smile monster's in the picture, and again, traditional dreams. It gives us a view into why she's so susceptible to this monster in the first place. And, this movie is scary enough to keep you on your toes. I dug the detective nature of it, and I think it definitely deserves a place on the shelf this week for dreams.
I would say scary enough isn't giving it enough credit. I mean, I love horror movies, and my barometer for what makes a great horror film is like, if I'm watching this alone, which is the way I prefer to watch horror, is this going to frighten me? And this did. There's some moments in this that are truly scary. And I love when a horror movie can do that during the daytime. It doesn't rely on just darkness and, shadows.
What's around the corner.
Right. Yeah. And
there's a little bit of that, but
there's
a good effect.
There's a little bit of that, but also, they're out in broad daylight, and there's some frightening things that happen. I also got to say, the cast here, I loved the performances, but apart from Kal Penn, who we know from the Harold and Kumar franchise, there's nobody in here that I recognize. So, these are all newcomers, and they all do such a fucking good job.
Yeah, they all seem pretty seasoned.
They do. And I got to believe that the director played a big role in that in terms of getting them to act in the way that he imagined us. I can't wait to see the next movie that this guy comes up with. I mean,
apparently it's going to be a sequel to this.
So. Oh, yeah, great. So. It does feel like a film that is ready to become potentially a franchise. I got to say, though, for me, even though I seek out horror, I think this was horribly marketed. I remember seeing previews for it, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a movie about people smiling and killing each other, and I don't need that. Or I'm just not intrigued by that. And
I mean,
it's
apparently it wasn't, because it was a huge hit.
Yeah, it did do well, and
you're just not tapped into the Gen Z marketing.
Perhaps I'm not. I felt like it was. Yeah, I felt like it was a movie that it ended up not being, and it was at least going to be a movie that it ended up wasn't. But yeah, I'm so glad you picked this, because I was pleasantly surprised by how good this was.
Great. Glad to hear that.
That brings me to my final choice, and I'm going to stay in close proximity year-wise to where you were. I'm going to 2021, and my final choice is Matrix Resurrections.
Ooh.
We keep this movie among the video games in the store. The back of the box here is, plagued by strange memories, Neo's life takes an unexpected turn when he finds himself back inside the Matrix. Tagline, return to the source. So we've had back-of-the-box summaries that get things wrong, some that give away too much. I can't remember one that says so little about a movie that's trying to do so much.
You don't really have to say much.
Not really, but boy, yeah, this summary is brief.
Very brief.
Of course, there's no easy way to summarize a Matrix movie, so it's hard to fault the writer here. And this is the fourth Matrix movie. Most have seen the original trilogy. In fact, most is probably not accurate. I would say pretty much everyone has seen at least the first one.
I mean, anyone that matters.
Right. And if you know the gist of the Matrix, well, even if you don't, it bears mentioning, our reality is a proverbial dreamscape that we live in while serving as food for machines in the distant future. So that's kind of what this whole franchise is based on. Energy sources,
Yeah,
yes.
not necessarily food. They keep us alive to suck our energy out.
Right. And you might guess that...
Debatable science on that?
Perhaps, yes. You might guess that the reason I chose this is because the very idea of the Matrix is that it's a dream. But if that were true, I would have plucked the first movie because that is still the best in the franchise.
You definitely can make the argument that the Matrix is a dream.
Right. And
it is.
It is. It absolutely is.
It is a digital dream.
Right. But the reason I chose this has more to do with how it came about. So Warner Brothers have been clamoring for a Matrix sequel since the third movie debuted. I mean, even though the second and third films are far inferior to the first by perhaps a wide margin, they made the studio tons and tons of money, and naturally Warner Brothers wanted more. But the Wachowskis resisted. It wasn't until Lana Wachowski had the idea for how to resurrect the franchise in a dream that she agreed to return to the world of the Matrix. And this was at a time when she was dealing with the loss of her parents, coming to grips with some gender identity
She'd also
challenges.
been giving an ultimatum by Warner Brothers.
Oh, had she?
Well, basically, they were like, we're going to make a Matrix 4. You can be involved or you can not be involved. And that's basically that's a plot point of the movie. That actually happened in real life. They're like, we're making this movie whether you're in or out. It's up to you.
Yes. But yeah, her idea for how to actually do this when she agreed to do this came about when she woke up and felt that there was a real way to bring these characters back to life. And it was during a period of grief, but she came up with I think a pretty clever approach. And much like New Nightmare, it's a very meta movie. This is positing that the first three films in the franchise were in fact video games, and this Return to the Matrix is following on the success of those films as games working for their audience.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. It's confusing.
It is.
This movie,
as any Matrix movie is.
This movie poses a lot of interesting ideas.
It does.
I'm not sure it necessarily follows through on all of those ideas, or at least to my satisfaction.
No, I don't disagree. I really like this franchise. I was afraid that there was no way a fourth movie could be satisfying, and I avoided this for a good year and a half after it came out because I was just like, I'm going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
But I was especially worried that this was just a self-contained single film. Like there was no plans to do more, and it's not the beginning of another trilogy, so it just felt like it couldn't be anything but a swing and a miss. And I don't disagree. It does not fulfill every promise that it makes, but I think that it is also more restrained than the original movies were, which built a world that stretched in infinite distances in every direction.
I'm not that familiar with 2 and 3, to be perfectly honest.
What I do like about this is that it's not trying to necessarily be more of the same, if only from a filmmaking style, as the originals were. The visual language is dramatically different here. Everything isn't bathed in green. And, there's color. It's more organic. We have natural light, less choreography. And it's, like I said, somehow a little bit more self-contained than the originals were. And, as we mentioned, similar to New Nightmare, this recontextualizes the movies that it was based on. There are familiar faces, there are new faces, but the DNA here is much the same as this franchise kind of built itself on.
I mean, it's through and through a Matrix movie.
Yes, 100%.
Maybe a few too many cute robots.
But
But you know what? It was great to see Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss as like old people.
Yeah.
Like they were just so, I don't know, they were just like a comfortable quality to their scenes as like in the coffee shop, just like hanging out.
Yes. And I mean, Neil Patrick Harris is great.
Yeah.
The guy who takes on the role of Morpheus is fun. I do like that you get to see a filmmaker here who has grown and matured since helming the first three movies. And watching this, I can't help but to wonder what the first three films would have been like if Lana Wachowski from 2021 had made those movies decades earlier, because this just feels better. And while I like the style of those original movies, it wears on you after three. And this is a refreshing break from that original style.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This scores a 2.8 on Letterboxd. I do think it deserves a little bit more than. I think this is a 3-star movie.
Yeah. I mean, if I did halvesies, I would go 3.5.
Yeah.
I don't do that. So yeah, it's a 3. It doesn't reach the level of 4 for me, but
right.
For me, it's a solid 3-star movie. I mean,
solid 3-star movie. Yeah.
Like maybe one day it'll be 4.
And I think that for anyone who does love this franchise, or at least appreciates the original, this is a nice reason to return. And I don't think this did as well as Warner Brothers expected. I believe that a lot of people avoided this.
I think it came out during the pandemic, and it wasn't really in theaters.
Right.
But like you said, you were avoiding it. If you're a fan of the Matrix franchise, if you're a fan of the first Matrix movie,
yes,
I mean, definitely go back to this one.
Indeed.
You can skip the 2 and 3 if you really want to, but
you can. Yeah, I think you can. I think this movie kind of assumes that a lot of people did.
Yeah.
So yeah, for the context of within the context of dreams, this is my final choice. And Rob, I couldn't dream up a better looking staff recommendation shelf, especially one that focuses on the subject of dreams.
It's quite beautiful.
It is. The 6 movies we conjured up for this evening are Waking Life, New Nightmare, Big Lebowski, Open Your Eyes, Smile, and Matrix Resurrections.
If you want to drop us a line, the comments and suggestions box is right here at the store next to the register.
Right there.
But if you're not in the area, you can go to rewindvideopod.com to get on our mailing list or to otherwise connect with us online.
After we wipe the sleep out of our eyes following this episode, we'll start thinking about our next theme, which is our annual Halloween episode. And what is it that's going to take the crown from Hail Satan? This year, it's going to be blood.
I have a feeling Satan's going to be involved.
How can he not? We'll have 6 films to recommend, but of course, we're also interested in what you think, so don't hesitate to hit us up on social. In the meantime, feel free to stop by the counter for a movie to watch. We will see you next time.
Be kind, recommend.
Hail Satan.